By birth, I'm a Torontonian. But whenever anybody asks where I'm from, I say I'm from Wikwemikong on Manitoulin Island. So I say I'm a Torontonian because I was born and raised here. But it was a time which was a very different time. It was almost pre-civil rights era. So Indians, I'm going to use a term that I was raised with, that I was always known, was not a place, this was not a kind place. Any urban center was not a kind, people think it's bad now, but back then it was way. So one of the, and I teach and live in Alberta right now, they say mini Texas. One of the amazing, astounding things of Toronto is how culture can live in itself. You can be of almost, well, I don't know Toronto these days. I haven't been here. As I said, I left here 40 years ago. But just as somebody from Wikwemikong, Toronto has a very large population of members from Vickie. And my parents had a home here. And so our home was like a Grand Central Station. Jeanette Corbett-Laval, Edna Mantwabi, Duke Redbird, there was always people coming and going. And I just treasured those moments because being in a huge city like Toronto, and for whatever reasons, I didn't have identity shame. I always thought we were amazing, beautiful, and courageous. I didn't know that at the time when I was a child, but one of the things that every summer, every moment we had free, we went home to Vickie to see Grandma and Grandpa, all my cousins. But my summer visit was my favorite because that's when the powwow was on. At the time it was at the arena on stage, but I would watch them as a little girl, very 6, I don't know how old, very young, and be in awe of just the celebration, I just seen power. I just seen amazement. My mom has a story where I tugged on her dress and my auntie, make me a powwow dress. I wanted to be there. And I had no clue. I didn't understand the singing. When I got older, when I was a teenager, I did go to Sam the Record Man on Yonge Street, and they had on the second floor in the back corner, they had a whole bunch of powwow albums. And I went and got those, but at the age of 6 or 8 years old, I didn't understand the drum. I seen the dancers moving, so they made me a simple little powwow dress, and I went into the middle where nobody would see me and bounced around, and just when I reflect on it now, I know it's about the acceptance. I know it's about I could just be me. So now we're going to fast forward a bit to when I was a teenager, so 14, 15 years old. My mom had tried Girl Guides, some kind of neighborhood clubs, because she was told, you need to get your girls into some activity, otherwise there's going to be trouble. So she tried these things and none of them ever sat with me. So finally she went to the original Indian Center on 210 Beverly, walked in, seen Millie Redmond, the director at the time, and said, I need my girls to be doing something. And Millie just looked at us and said, do you know how to do powwow dance? And you know, I was shy and quiet. I might have shrugged my shoulders, and then Millie Redmond just said, you're going to run the powwow club. I recall seeing powwow from when I was home in Wikwemikong. So we had our social night, we had a pot of soup, and we had drum night. And it was my mom said those nights when I came home from school was the quickest I ever did the dishes and my chores, and then hightailed it down to 210 Beverly for the powwow club. Left 210 Beverly and it moved to here at 16 Spadina Road. And we still continued having a powwow, a dance club here. But I became a mom and 2 little babies, and traveling around with 2 little ones is not the same. So I still I was a program director, and so I put my dance dreams on the side. And then Renee came. I watched a video and I see him doing a dance performance downstairs in the auditorium. But I came in here in this room and we did pliés and stretches. I don't know how we did bar stretches, but we did all of that. And I had never met somebody who speaks dance. And it was what I wanted. So it did have me decide, this is what I want. I want a life of dance, but our dance as a Anishinaabe, as a indigenous, as an Indian, I would say at the time. And so a year later, I had a beautiful job here as a program director, and being groomed to become the executive director, and I loved being here. I love what friendship centers do for urban communities. So I packed it up. I gave my notice and I left. I was going to miss Vickie Powell because we were going to go to Piikani, Southern Alberta Treaty 7. And if I could pause there, I would almost say that was another turning point. Getting to Piikani and that's kind of like in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And I was shawl dancing there. And it was supposed to be a 2-week trip. The 2-week trip lasted, that was the summer of 84, 85, 86, 87. I came back east in the fall of 87 for a lot of reasons. Mostly my children were preteens. I'd worked in child and family services, and the message that came to me while working in child and family services is children need to know their land. They need to know their kin. I was, as much as I loved, and obviously I still love Treaty 7, I'm back there right now as a university professor, but I had to come home for my children, and I had to come home because I missed the trees and the water. I came home and just became a full-time dancer, meaning powwow dance. Just traveling across the land, from here, all over the plains, the Midwest, Florida, dancing, raising my children that way. I was, by this time, a single-parent mom, and it was the only way that, yes, we realize that the social economic issues that permeate our urban centers is horrendous now, but every generation has it. And so as my children were entering teenage years, adolescent years, I thought, I need to give a grounding force to them. And dance was all I knew. We didn't have it's interesting, I didn't have a budget for YMCA and sports programs, but somehow, as long as we had a little bit of gas money in our wallet, off we went with a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and a tent, and we went all over the land, and I raised my children that way for the next 87, for the next solid 10 years while they were teens. And then in 1996, I think my son was 18 at the time, Matthew, we got invited and asked to do the Olympics Atlanta, Georgia. So off we went to Atlanta, Georgia, mega shows per day, thousands of people. And then that same summer was the phone call from the BAM Center. I think by this point I had already started working, doing dance instruction with Center for Indigenous Theater, Native Earth, Native Women in the Arts. Like Toronto is my community. And so I would come to Toronto in those mid-90s, come and do workshops with the students, and then that rolled into the BAM Center, and then I spent the next 8 years working with Mari, Muriel, Alejandro, with a whole bunch of, and I'd have to say that really was a turning point, being there, being in a studio. Especially my generation, my parents' generation, were told to be silent. And so from a very young child, we learn to assess a room, to look at people's faces, to watch the body language. So that becomes almost a defense mechanism. So you go into the community hall or you walk into a home, and because the drinking was so prevalent, more so in those days, so you always are reading the bodies and reading the faces and using your senses. But one of the things is we don't know it. We don't say to one another, did you look at their face? Did you look at their eyes? It's just an innate ability. So even when I started dancing, the joy of being in the center of the dance floor, listening to the drum, I had no language to know that I'm looking at how it made me feel here. So that when I went to the BAM Center and I worked with Alejandro, and I'm telling the stories, and then he said, okay, well, we need to get into choreographic development, and which is a new term for me, choreographic development, because in my era of dancing, I didn't know the language, but it was that drum starts and it swoops me. I have this place by the water. There's falls. So I went over there, and I was, to be honest, I was beating myself up, thinking, I'm just a power dancer, and I really am questioning my role and my function in this studio, in this doing choreographic development. And I realized I had been telling my students, listen to this song. The song, here's the technical, we don't call it 4 quarters, we call it, there's 4 push-ups to a song. So it wasn't about being technical and teaching how that song went. It was about talking about the spirit of that song and how it enters our soul. And when it enters our soul, we have to be open and to take that, and how our body defines that, whether as a grass dancer, a shawl dancer, or in my case, a jingle dress dancer, and how that movement and how it speaks. To this day, I still open my class with Marvin Gaye. And my poor students, some of them love it, they all have to dance. And I don't teach a dance class, I teach liberal arts, I teach indigenous studies, like the political issues, the social issues, all of that. But I open with, because when I teach, it's to the soul. I would be always curious about the smart people. There's no disputing that the stereotype of the drunk, stupid, lazy Indian still exists to this day. And truth be known, my dad struggled with his trauma issues, and alcohol was the way that was his healing salve. And so, but when my dad was sober and my dad was talking, and when I heard stories of my dad, they were always about how brilliant and how intelligent he was. But society paints us another way. We're either stereotyped as a drunk, stupid, lazy Indian, or we're romanticized as the beautiful power dancer, or the totem pole Indian, or the stoic Indian. And so when these academics came into the Indian Center, that part of me was like, I want to be smart like them. There are 2 things Marie Sinclair said. It was education that got us in this mess, and it will be education that gets us out of this mess. And so if we're going to be agents of change, then I decided to be an academic. I felt that work was so important about working in education that I left dance a few years ago in 2019. I did my, with Older and Reckless with Claudia, and then went to Treaty 3 and did the exhibition at the Kenora Lake of the Woods Museum on the jingle dress, went to speak there, and then the door closed. Part of it is the pandemic that happened. Part of it is, but part of it is getting older. But this spring, I realized, being that academic, why I thought the work was important about change was because of what my life of dance gave me. My weight is the stories that after I did my healing and recovery, I can appreciate the pain that my parents went through, that my grandparents and all of my community on my reserve. And so those are the stories that I live in and I carry. And now I take, and just as my book is called A Celebration Through Song and Dance. And as I said, I only have one sentence that talks about my atrocities. You know, go watch Indian Horrors, read a Richard Wagamese, any of those if you want to know the horror details. I ain't talking about it. It's not my life. How I define myself is the joy and beauty of what dance gave to my life. I am a dancer, I am an educator, I am an academic, and I believe in the work of social activism, so I merge them all together. It's the way I raised my children, it's the way I believe, and it's the way my circle is, and so it is.